Շնորհակալություն, բարի երեկո, ուզեմ մի քանի խոսքով արտահայտվել նախ եւ հետո հարցերով գնամ մասնակցել եւ հուսամ որ թարգմանչությունը լավ աշխատի, որտեղ անգլերենով ուզեմ խոսել, կարևոր նյութերով չեմ ուզել սխալ հասկացվի։ The risk is that I will say things that have already been said, so I'm going to try not to do that. But I am going to say things I've said before, and probably on this occasion, on this night, I feel it much more even as a burden on me, on all of us, and I think we're headed in the wrong direction collectively. In the future, as is the case all around, in all of humanity, we will be judged by what we did and what we didn't do. And whether what we did and what we didn't do was for good or was for bad. We had a famous ancestor of ours who invented our language. Thousand years plus later, we're using that language. He gave us a gift in the future, and he is judged for what he did as good. There are people who start wars. There are people who end wars. They'll be judged for what they did. There are people who write books that affect people's ideology to fight each other or to be at peace. There are people who build cities that last for centuries or that collapse at the next earthquake. So the point is, when we're talking about the future, we have to realize that we will be judged. And we won't be judged by some higher power, although we can talk about higher powers that are overseeing us, but actually we'll be judged by the future people that we are handing what we did and its consequences to. And that's the one message I want to give you. For 22 years, as Ruben said, we've worked together on trying to initiate a dialogue about the future of what it is to be Armenian. And for 23 years, we've heard, why do you care about the future? Just focus on the present. We have so many problems in the present that the future is irrelevant compared to the present. When our present is much better, we'll start thinking about the future. And that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how things work. Because if in the urgency of the present, we can't discuss and imagine a future that we can all belong to and that is worth the investments, the sacrifices, the compromises needed to achieve it, we will be stuck in the present. In fact, we will go back to our past. And our past, except for a few bright moments, isn't one that I think anybody wants to go back to. Not our past of 100 years ago, not our past ultimately ruled by many, many other powers. In the future, it will be the act of what we do today that will determine what kind of country we have. And when you hear, and you'll hear from me, the disappointment, the frustration that we have in the diaspora about what's happening today, it's because the diaspora can only impact the future. Because we are living all around the world and we wish what we are experiencing to Armenia. We want to connect Armenia with those possibilities. We have no say in the future of Armenia. We have no say in the future of Armenians. All we can do is come, express our wishes, support the present through acts of generosity, and that's all very important. But if one of you today leaves the room and says, you know what, let everybody else worry about the present, I will worry about the future, we will have added one more person. Now, many of you are part of Future Armenian, and I recognize that this is like Sirpazan going to church on Sunday and giving a speech as to why people don't come to church. And you are in church. You are in a discussion on the future, and I understand that. But I hope that you will be able to get enough confidence in this activity, not to question it, but to spread it to other people and to literally sign up soldiers, future Armenians, who actually care about this. So that's one thing I want to say. I'm sorry, I'm going to speak a few more minutes. We are at the American University of Armenia. And if you look at the grandiose expressions in the top of what a university is, what education is, why do we educate our kids? So that they may be ready for the future. Which future? The future that randomly follows the mistakes we make today? Or the future we are all collectively building? why educate people if they're just going to live in the present? So this is a perfect place to have a discussion about the future. Not the future I want, not the future any one of you wants, but our collective future. And here's an interesting observation. Who does our collective future belong to? Does it belong to the church? In part. Does it belong to the current government? Well, in small part. Why? Because the current government, the current institutions, the current companies, all the institutions around the diaspora are elected and selected to take care of the present, not the future. So who does the future belong to? And I would argue, whoever wants to take it over. The future is actually an orphan. And it will either remain an orphan, or some subset of us will say, you know what, the present, we're going to struggle, we're going to do everything, let's build this future. So that's another point I'd love for you to at least think about. So in the past, I've talked about being Armenian by choice. This is an expression that is used often in the diaspora when somebody marries a non-Armenian, and that person chooses to accept an Armenian culture, the language, the traditions, and we call them Armenians by choice. And very often I've talked about how nice it would be if every Armenian by birth would also be an Armenian by choice. And that is, instead of hoping that our birthright is enough and nobody can question our Armenianness, that we can just actually choose to be reborn as, and here's the modification I'll make, a future Armenian. So I think we can all be future Armenians by choice, even if we're current Armenians by birth or by marriage. It's going to take a lot of imagination. Every time we come together, we criticize each other's ideas. Let me tell you again, this is not to be defensive, but I invented the word in one of our future Armenian board meetings, knnatadaran. It's not tadaran, it's knnatadaran. We have invented the world's best criticizing institution. It's just ourselves. We criticize everybody's idea. It doesn't matter whose idea it is. Even before they finish the idea, we start criticizing the idea. If we criticize ideas about the future, we will be stuck in the past and the present. So there has to be room to dare to say things that are possible. Can we be a center of artificial intelligence? I can already hear people saying, us, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, China, what us? Forget that. So it can't be, forget that. Those countries weren't those countries. Singapore was a fairly backwards country a few decades ago. Korea was an extremely backwards country, South Korea. So that's an important thing. And it's going to take, Artak used the word surrealism. Unfortunately, he described the current situation as surrealistic. Actually, it's okay to imagine the future as surrealistic. The future is supposed to be surrealistic so that you can actually figure out what currently grotesque-looking thing that you don't believe you can make suddenly becomes a path forward. So it takes imagination. There's a great quote that I will use by George Bernard Shaw. And it says, imagination is the beginning of creation. You imagine what you desire, you will what you imagine, and at last you create what you will. Imagine based on your desire, create, and then that's what you get. If we don't have an imagination about our future, what are we creating? What are we creating? What are we fighting over today? So that's, again, something that we should, I think, take seriously. I think that we are also threatened, as we live here today in Armenian world, by massive forces that are trying to disconnect us. We've used the word unity. We use the word unity for the church. Every diaspora in Armenian knows we have two churches that basically represent essentially the same religion, and there's been a lack of unity. And we talk about unity as though we're this close, and if we just try harder, we're going to achieve unity. I think we are at the precipice of disunity, utter disconnectedness among each other. And I think the only thing that will unite us and connect us or keep us connected is a common understanding of the future. A sense of obligation towards the motherland isn't going to motivate somebody in Alaska. They don't have a sense of obligation. But if you can get them to adopt the future Armenian orphan and say, you know what, I have a historic connection and I'm going to do a little bit to make that better. Not, I'm going to take the current situation and pour water on the fire, but in fact, I can't do much because there's governments and there's politics and there's wars. And again, how do we make the connectedness about the future? But I have to tell you, to be connected, we need to have mutual respect. We need to have shared goals. We need to have confidence in our abilities, in each other's abilities. Armenians all have confidence in their own abilities and utter doubt about everybody else's abilities. How can we have confidence in each other's abilities? Patience. Hell, we've been waiting to have an independent country for 800 years. For more than a few years, a couple of years. And now we have one, and we're busy criticizing each other to oblivion. How can we have the patience to disagree, to debate, to listen, all those things? So patience is going to take to stay connected. If everybody just takes their bags and goes home because people aren't listening to them, that's not a good idea. Patience. Faith. You heard from Sirpazan. Look, our religion should propel us. We have lost millions of lives because of our belief, because of our religion. And it's been our national religion. We're not part of some other Christian church. We have our own national religion. What is religion all about? It's faith. It's faith in something that you cannot see. It's faith in a possibility. Well, faith in a future you cannot yet see should propel us to believe in it and to act towards it. So I think it's going to take faith. And then love. Sirpazan used the word love. You might say, what do I know as an entrepreneur, as a biotechnologist, as a philanthropist about love? Every one of us knows about love. How can we fall in love with a future Armenia? How can we fall in love with future Armenians? Okay, if you want to hate the present Armenians, fine. But why can't we just love what could be? And it takes that type of faithful, positive, optimistic thing. And I know these words sound crazy, and every time I talk, everybody after tells me, I wish you would say one thing that sounds realistic. But if you want to listen to realism, read the social media. Every day of the week, people will tell you why nothing will work, we're terrible, we're going to die. And so that's realism. I'm not going to help you with that. Okay, I'm going to finish here. And by the way, I want to say one other thing. Sorry, it's Friday evening, you're all here. Most of you are of an age where you have kids, right? What is our obligation to our kids? To give them an opportunity to have a better life than us. That's the case in all corners of the world. That's the bond. Why do we have kids? Why do we bring them to a world in which they're going to have a worse life than us? Well, if we're not going to do this for each other, then do it for our kids. The future is going to provide them opportunity or threat or misery. What are we doing to give them that future? I would argue relatively little. Amount of time we talk collectively, not just with future Armenian, but in the government, in the newspapers, about concrete steps to make 10, 5, 20 years from now a fundamental departure of our current situation is extremely little. Almost done. Sorry for keeping you here. I hope this isn't too boring. It's an interesting other thing I'll say. In the diaspora, we're switching between diaspora and Armenia. In the diaspora, there's an interesting expression. In English, we are Armenian Americans. I am an Armenian American because I'm an American, but I'm an Armenian American. In Armenian, we call it Apagա Հայ. We actually consider it an American Armenian. If we can't convince Armenian Americans about the future of Armenians in Armenia, they're not going to become Apagā Հայ. They will become Haya Amerigatsi. They will stay that way. And again, I want to tell you, in the 30 years we've been independent as a country, in the 22 years I've come to this country 5, 6 times a year, I have never felt as worried that the diaspora is going to go back to being disconnected with the motherland as I do today. And I know nobody wants to hear that, and I have never said that publicly, but I am, as Ruben is making an important point about the independence and autonomy and self-determination of Artsakh and its safety, I'm telling you at the same time, just to make things worse on a Friday evening, that we have an existential crisis of the diaspora becoming disconnected. Do not take the bonds that have been created around the hope that we're going to build a beautiful Armenia together as for granted. Because the flip between Haya Amerikatsi to America Hai is very easy. And we have a perfectly good life. And a Surya Hai, and a Fransa Hai, and a Bolsa Hai even. But we want it flipped. And that's very, very important in my view. Okay, I usually don't sound negative, but I hope you will at least take me for serious. I would call whoever listening, not in this room, but outside, for a serious reevaluation of the role and the relationship between the diaspora and the country. The institutions, the government, the companies, the nonprofits, everything. It is not the case that everything's okay. It is not the case that nothing has changed. There is a palpable difference in the period we're living. So I have no answers, by the way, but I think that serious scholars, serious professionals should be brought in and really reevaluated. Future Armenian tried to do a little bit of this, and it was a wonderful citizens' assembly that started putting some topics on the table, but I think the need for that is increasing. I also want to encourage you under the framework of the citizens' assembly to realize that we are all citizens of future Armenians. We are citizens in this future Armenian. We may not all be citizens of Armenia today, but we are citizens of that future. And therefore, as citizens do, we should hold leadership at large, that doesn't mean just government, it means any kind of leadership, accountable. We should say, what decisions are we making today that are going to impact our future for the better or for the worse? If it's for the better, explain why and how. And if I believe you, I'm going to put all my efforts into you succeeding in building that future. If I don't agree with you, I expect you to listen to my objections. That's what a citizen does. Now, we do that about today, taxes going up, Social Security, unemployment, this, that. Are we willing to do it about our future? So I would urge citizens all over, whoever wants to really take that responsibility. And then finally, I'll just say, we have to remind each other not to give up believing, not to give up dreaming, not to give up struggling, compromising, convincing or being convinced, insisting. And if we do all that, I think we can create a more prosperous, a more secure Armenia, and importantly, that one that lasts for thousands of years, because we are the beneficiaries of whoever before us actually waged that battle and got us to this point. And today, we can't just say, well, that's the government's fault, that's somebody else's fault, no, every one of us should take this on. Thank you for listening.